Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. I truly appreciate your comments, feedback, and thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. See you again in the next stories.
During a weekend family dinner, my stepmother slammed her fork onto the table, turned toward me, and shouted, "Either you give your room to your younger brother, or pack your bags and get out." She didn't whisper it. She shouted it right in the middle of a dinner I had helped pay for in a home my late parents spent their lives building. My stepmother glared at me with an entitled smirk, while her son sat beside her quietly grinning like he had already won. My late father's memory was erased from those walls, replaced by their greed. No one defended me. No one said a word. But I, Felicia Bishop, a 27-year-old financial analyst, did not cry. I didn't beg, nor did I waste my breath arguing with people who mistook my patience for weakness. Instead, I took a deep breath, set my silverware down, and stood up with my back straight. "All right," I said calmly. "I'll go pack my bags." They thought they were kicking me out onto the street. What they didn't know was that while they were busy playing masters of my house, I was already holding the keys to my own freedom and a legal surprise that would shatter their comfortable little world forever. If you enjoy intense family drama stories of revenge and self-respect, please take a second to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. 3 days later, I was enjoying my brand new home on a quiet hillside while they were about to receive a massive wake-up call. The cold night fog of Portland enveloped my car as I started the engine and drove away from the old house. The rain was turning into a steady drizzle against the windshield, mirroring the quiet anger stirring inside me as I navigated through the dimly lit streets toward downtown. I pulled into the driveway of a boutique hotel, booked a room for the night, and carried my 2 suitcases upstairs without looking back. Once the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the suffocating noise of my stepmother's greed finally vanished into complete silence. I sat on the edge of the queen-sized bed, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop on the desk to take complete control of my life. As a senior financial analyst, numbers had always been my anchor in times of chaos because, unlike ungrateful people, numbers never lied. I logged into my personal banking application to review my primary high-yield savings account, which I had built dollar by dollar through years of discipline. The screen displayed a balance of $212,000, a sum I had managed to protect, despite constantly covering household expenses for the last 2 years. Ever since my father passed away, I had quietly swallowed my grief and carried the financial burden of that house alone, out of respect for his memory. I had paid the annual property taxes, covered expensive roof repairs, and handled every utility bill while Valerie and her son lived there completely rent-free. My patience had been driven by a foolish hope that honoring my father meant preserving the family home, but their cruel ambition at dinner made me realize I was merely funding my own disrespect. I closed the banking tab and opened my personal messages, scrolling back to a link sent the previous week by my best friend Antoinette Stevenson. She was a licensed real estate consultant who had been urging me for months to stop sacrificing my independence for people who viewed me as nothing more than a bank account. Attached to her message was a listing for a charming 2-story cottage nestled in the quiet hills of West Hills, listed at $480,000. The property featured expansive cedar decks, large floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the forest, and a pristine view of the valley below. At the time, I had dismissed her text with a polite smile, assuming I needed to stay in the family home to keep my father's memory alive. Looking at those high-resolution photographs now under the dim lamp of the hotel room, the serene environment felt like a sanctuary calling my name. With $212,000 in liquid savings, I had more than enough money to put down a solid 40% down payment of $192,000. My steady income as a financial professional meant securing a conventional mortgage for the remaining balance would be effortless, leaving me with a comfortable emergency cushion in my account. I tapped Antoinette's name and typed a quick message asking her to schedule a private walkthrough of the West Hills property for the very next morning. She replied within seconds, confirming that the listing agent was a close colleague and that we could inspect the house at 8 in the morning. A profound sense of relief washed over me as I closed the laptop screen and walked over to the window, watching the rain slick the pavement below. For the first time in years, I was no longer planning my future around the needs of people who took my generosity for granted. Tomorrow morning, I would take the first concrete step towards securing my own sanctuary, leaving Valerie and her entitled son to face the harsh reality of their own greed. 5 days later, I held a warm cup of coffee in my hand and drove up West Hills to finalize the closing procedures and collect the keys to my new home. The early morning mist hung low over the winding mountain roads, casting a tranquil silver veil over the towering evergreen pines that lined the driveway. After completing the wire transfer for the down payment and signing the final escrow documents, the listing agent handed me a set of brass keys with a polite congratulations. I unlocked the front door and walked into the spacious living room, where natural sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows and illuminated the polished hardwood floors. Stepping out onto the expansive wooden deck, I listened to the gentle rustle of pine needles in the crisp Oregon breeze, feeling a deep sense of calm that I had not experienced in years. For the first time since my father's passing, I felt safe in a space that belonged entirely to me, away from the constant judgment and suffocating demands of my former household. That same afternoon, I drove back down toward the business district to attend a scheduled meeting with my estate attorney, Arthur Pendleton. His office was located in a quiet brick building lined with leather-bound legal volumes, reflecting the sharp precision of a man who had handled complex property litigation for over 3 decades. After we exchanged warm handshakes and settled into the armchairs across his desk, I handed him a manila folder containing the original deed to my family home, alongside my father's death certificate. I explained how Valerie had taken complete control of the residence after my father passed away, treating the property as her personal empire, while demanding that I pack my belongings and vacate my own bedroom. Arthur adjusted his glasses, carefully reviewed the land registry records, and pulled up the state inheritance statutes on his computer monitor to verify the legal title history. He leaned back in his leather chair, set his pen on the desk, and looked at me with an expression of absolute professional clarity. He explained that because my father had died without a specific separate will, Oregon's intestate succession laws dictated that the residential property automatically belonged jointly to my father's surviving descendants and his spouse. Since the house had been originally purchased by my biological parents prior to his second marriage, my legal stake in the property stood at 50% of its total appraised market value. Based on recent real estate comparables in that suburban neighborhood, the house was currently valued at $500,000, meaning my lawful share equaled $250,000. Arthur firmly reassured me that Valerie possessed zero legal authority to evict me from the premises, nor did she hold sole ownership rights over the estate. Hearing those precise figures confirmed that my years of quiet patience had given her a false sense of entitlement over an asset she never actually owned. I looked Arthur straight in the eye and instructed him to draft a formal legal notice immediately demanding an official resolution to the estate. We agreed to present Valerie with 2 straightforward legal options. Either she must secure financing to buy out my $250,000 equity stake within 30 days, or the property would be placed on the open market for a court-ordered public sale. Arthur nodded approvingly, noting that given her lack of independent income and poor credit, standing a buyout would be virtually impossible, rendering a sale inevitable. I signed the retainer agreement with a steady hand, knowing that the legal wheels were now officially in motion to dismantle her illusion of power. 4 days after I moved into my new home, my phone vibrated repeatedly with demanding text messages from Valerie. She blithely sent a detailed shopping list consisting of prime-cut steaks, imported wines, and an expensive custom birthday cake for Gavin's upcoming party, demanding that I transfer $200 immediately to cover the groceries. Her tone carried the same arrogant expectation that I owed them financial support simply for existing under what she considered her roof. Looking at the notifications popping up on my screen while sitting in my quiet sunroom, I felt a wave of cold detachment replacing whatever remaining tolerance I had kept over the years. I typed back a concise response, telling her that if they wanted to host a lavish party, they could cover the costs using their own money. Without waiting for her reply, I opened my online banking application to review the authorized user accounts linked to my primary credit card. During my father's final months, I had added both Valerie and Gavin as secondary cardholders on my account, solely to handle emergency household purchases and medical groceries. I had forgotten to remove their permissions in the chaos of moving, allowing them to quietly charge hundreds of dollars every month for personal luxuries at my expense. With a few swift taps on my phone screen, I permanently revoked their authorized user access and canceled both physical cards instantly. The system updated immediately, rendering their plastic cards completely useless before they even realized their endless gravy train had hit a dead end. Less than an hour later, my phone began ringing violently with an incoming call from Gavin, who was standing at a high-end specialty grocery checkout counter. He launched into an enraged tirade the moment I picked up, screaming that his card had been declined twice in front of a long line of impatient customers. He demanded to know why I was sabotaging his birthday preparations and shouted that I was obligated to fix the banking glitch immediately so he could finish paying for his luxury items. I listened to his frantic rant in total silence before answering in a calm voice that there was no glitch and that my financial sponsorship of his lifestyle was officially over. I ended the call while he was still yelling in disbelief, refusing to engage with his childish anger any further. Within minutes, Valerie called back, her voice shaking with intense rage, as she accused me of being a cruel, ungrateful stepdaughter trying to humiliate her family. She shouted that I had abandoned my household responsibilities and threatened to call the local police department to report me for deserting the property without paying my fair share of the mortgage and utilities. I let out a soft, amused laugh over the phone, reminding her that I was under no legal obligation to fund her living expenses or pay rent for a home I was currently being forced out of. I firmly told her that the house belonged to my late parents' estate rather than her personal treasury, and that she should spend her time preparing for reality instead of threatening me with bogus police reports. I hung up the phone before she could launch another round of threats, keeping my mouth shut about the formal legal notice that Arthur was delivering to her front porch that very afternoon. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, as raindrops tapped softly against the window glass, certified mail from Attorney Arthur's office was officially delivered directly into Valerie's hands. The formal document contained a rigorous partition demand, stating that under Oregon state inheritance laws, I held a half-share ownership interest in the residential property valued at $250,000. The notice outlined a strict 30-day deadline requiring her to either tender a full cash buyout of my equity or agree to place the suburban home on the open real estate market for an immediate public liquidation. Reading the legally binding summons drafted on professional law firm stationery, Valerie experienced the sudden collapse of the comfortable fiction she had built around her status as sole mistress of the house. The harsh reality of her financial situation quickly set in as she realized that securing a mortgage loan from any commercial lending institution was an absolute impossibility. Having relied entirely on my father's generosity for years without maintaining steady employment, her credit history was practically non-existent, and her debt-to-income ratio failed every standard underwriting criteria. Furthermore, Gavin's complete lack of income and his recent academic troubles meant he could offer zero financial assistance toward refinancing the existing debt. Without my regular salary paying the property taxes and monthly upkeep, she faced the terrifying prospect of being forcibly displaced from a spacious residence she could never afford to maintain on her own. Panic swiftly replaced her former arrogance as she spent the entire evening attempting to reach me through dozens of desperate phone calls and frantic voice messages. Her previous aggressive tone melted into weeping pleas, begging me to pick up the receiver so we could discuss what she called an unfortunate family misunderstanding. She left rambling messages promising that Gavin would gladly take a smaller bedroom and insisting that we ought to resolve our domestic matters privately rather than involving cold, legal professionals. Sitting peacefully on the covered porch of my West Hills cottage while watching the rain mist over the forest canopy, I listened to her recorded voice notes without feeling a single shred of guilt or hesitation. By Friday afternoon, realizing that her tearful voicemails were yielding no response, she sent a humbled text message begging for a face-to-face meeting at any location of my choosing. She claimed that if we could just sit down together over coffee, we could work out a sensible arrangement that would preserve the household without dragging the estate into a public auction. I waited several hours before typing a brief reply agreeing to meet her the following morning at a busy public coffee shop located in downtown Portland. However, I explicitly emphasized in my message that this encounter would not be an informal chat, informing her that I would be accompanied by my legal representative to ensure every discussion remained strictly aligned with binding statutory procedures. On Saturday morning, the air inside the crowded coffee shop grew suffocating as Valerie and Gavin sat across from me and attorney Arthur. The moment we settled into our wooden chairs, Valerie launched into a tearful performance, dabbing her eyes with a napkin while loudly accusing me of being an ungrateful daughter who was throwing her grieving stepmother onto the cold streets. Patrons at nearby tables turned to stare, but Arthur remained entirely unflappable, calmly unzipping his leather briefcase and spreading the official land title documents alongside years of bank statements across the table. He methodically explained that I had personally financed thousands of dollars in property maintenance while holding a fully recognized half-ownership stake in the estate. As Arthur presented the court-certified appraisal records, Valerie's theatrical weeping dissolved into stunned silence, her melodramatic act completely exposed under the weight of indisputable legal facts. Before she could attempt another round of emotional manipulation, I reached into my purse, pulled out a formal auto lease cancellation notice, and slid it directly across the table toward Gavin. I calmly informed him that I was ending the monthly lease agreement on the sedan he had been driving for 2 years, an account registered exclusively under my name and paid through my personal bank account. Gavin turned pale, shouting that he needed the vehicle for his daily commute and claiming I had no right to confiscate his primary mode of transportation without advance warning. I looked him dead in the eye, reminding him that the car belonged to my credit profile, and demanded that he hand over the key fob immediately unless he wanted me to report the vehicle as unauthorized property. Reluctantly, his hands trembling with rage, Gavin dropped the car keys onto the table, realizing that his days of riding on my financial coattails were officially over. 3 weeks later, the suburban home was officially liquidated through a swift real estate transaction, closing at its full market evaluation of $500,000. After the title company deducted closing costs and disbursed my lawful $250,000 equity share, the remaining funds left for Valerie were far too meager to secure a comparable home in the Portland area. Lacking verified employment and carrying terrible credit scores, she was flatly rejected by every respectable housing development, forcing her and Gavin to sign a lease for a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment situated on the far outskirts of town. The sudden downgrade from a spacious suburban residence to a noisy, rundown complex dealt a devastating blow to her fragile pride, shattering the delusion of luxury she had maintained at my expense. Within their new cramped quarters, toxic resentment quickly erupted between mother and son as the daily stress of living on a tight budget destroyed whatever harmony they had left. Gavin bitterly blamed Valerie for her arrogant behavior at the dinner table, shouting that her greed had cost them a beautiful house, a free luxury vehicle, and a comfortable lifestyle. Desperate for a financial lifeline, Valerie sent me a series of humbling text messages, begging for a monthly allowance to help cover their rent, and pleading for forgiveness under the guise of family solidarity. Sitting comfortably in my quiet home, I read her lengthy, desperate paragraphs. Without a single trace of remorse, tapped the settings icon on my phone and permanently blocked her number alongside Gavin's, severing our connection once and for all. 3 months later, warm morning sunlight pierced through the layer of mist, illuminating the spacious yard in front of my hillside home. I sat on the expansive cedar deck with Antoinette, enjoying fresh coffee while gazing out over the panoramic views of the Portland Valley spread below. The crisp mountain air carried the fresh scent of pine needles, replacing the lingering anxiety of my past with a profound sense of quiet contentment. Antoinette smiled warmly as she adjusted her sunglasses, remarking how completely transformed I looked since taking full control of my financial destiny. Looking out at the sunlit horizon, I knew that stepping away from toxic family obligations had been the single most empowering choice of my entire life. Earlier that week, Arthur had sent a final administrative update regarding the complete legal settlement of my parents' estate. Through his professional network, he mentioned that Gavin had been forced to withdraw from his university courses after losing his financial allowance, taking a grueling full-time job as a restaurant server to pay his basic bills. Valerie was similarly struggling to make ends meet, working exhausting night shifts as a retail cashier just to cover the monthly rent on their small suburban apartment. Stripped of my father's earnings and my endless financial backing, the harsh reality of real-world expenses had crushed their arrogant expectations, forcing them to face the direct consequences of their own entitlement. Their shared living situation had devolved into constant, bitter arguments as they endlessly blamed each other for losing the luxury they had taken for granted. A deep wave of peaceful closure settled over my heart as I listened to the final resolution of their story. I had successfully honored my late parents by protecting the legacy they worked so hard to build, refusing to let predatory greed destroy my future or undermine my self-respect. By standing firm against emotional guilt and establishing unbreakable legal boundaries, I had reclaimed both my financial sovereignty and my inner dignity. My father's true legacy was never meant to be a goldmine for ungrateful relatives. It was intended to empower me to build a safe, honorable, and independent life on my own terms. Sitting in my sunlit sanctuary surrounded by the beauty of nature, I knew that my parents would be immensely proud of the strength I had discovered within myself. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling completely unburdened by the shadow of my past, knowing I would never look back. I had enforced a strict policy of absolute non-contact, ensuring that no further manipulative messages or bad faith pleas could ever breach the peaceful perimeter of my life. My journey was no longer defined by the mistreatment I had endured, but by the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her worth and safeguarded her boundaries. Moving forward, my energy would be spent exclusively on growing my career, nurturing genuine friendships, and enjoying the peaceful home I had earned through my own resilience. I held my head high, ready to embrace the boundless possibilities of a future built entirely on freedom, self-respect, and absolute peace.